Okay, so get this. Imagine you dedicate your whole life to protecting endangered species, right? You become like a world-renowned figure,
Mm.
and then you get arrested for it.
Wow.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened to Captain Paul Watson.
Really?
Yeah, this guy is
Yeah.
he's the founder of Sea
Mhm.
Shepherd. He's been a lifelong ocean activist,
Nice.
and he's known for these really direct action campaigns to protect marine life.
So is Sea Shepherd still around?
That's a good question. They're still around.
Okay.
But Watson he left Sea Shepherd a while back and he started the Captain Paul Watson Foundation.
Okay.
So today we're going to be doing a deep dive into his arrest and his release and all the crazy stuff that happened in between.
Sounds intense.
It is, yeah. And our main source for this is a collection of blog posts from this website called Caring for Conservation.
Okay.
And it offers this really passionate firsthand account of the whole situation. And it seems like the blog posts are really outraged about Watson's arrest.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. I guess if you're a supporter of his work, you'd feel pretty strongly about it.
Absolutely. So the story starts in Greenland
Oh.
on July 21st, 2024.
Mm-hmm.
And Watson gets detained
Oh, wow.
based on a Japanese red notice.
A red notice. What's that exactly?
So basically, it stems from an incident back in 2013.
13.
Yeah, and the blog author, they seem to think this whole red notice thing was a total overreach.
Huh. Interesting.
Can you kind of give us a bit more background on these red notices?
Sure. So red notices are basically these requests for arrest
Okay.
and extradition that are issued by Interpol at the request of a member country.
Oh, so it's like an international thing?
Yeah, exactly. But here's the thing. They're not legally binding in every country.
Really?
Yeah. So a nation can choose whether or not to honor them.
Huh, okay.
And that decision often comes down to, the nature of the alleged crime
Mm.
and the existing treaties between the countries that are involved.
So there's a lot of interpretation wiggle room there.
Exactly. It's not automatic.
Gotcha. Well, the blog author, they definitely think this whole thing was politically motivated.
Yeah. I mean, I can see why they might think that,
Right.
especially considering the history between Japan and Sea Shepherd.
Oh, yeah, that's right. They've had some major clashes over the years, haven't they?
Oh, yeah, big time. Particularly over whaling.
Yeah.
Sea Shepherd's been very vocal against Japanese whaling practices.
Mm-hmm.
They've even, engaged in direct action campaigns to disrupt them.
Which is kind of their MO, right? They're known for those bold tactics.
Exactly. Their tactics have definitely made headlines over the decades.
For sure. So in Watson's case, he was denied bail.
Oh, wow.
And the blog author compares his situation to, dangerous criminals who are often granted bail,
Right?
while he's a nonviolent activist being
Right.
held without it.
That's a tough comparison.
Right? Do you think it holds up?
Well, it's a complicated issue for sure. Granting bail is usually based on a bunch of factors like the severity of the charges,
Okay.
the risk of the person fleeing,
Right.
and the potential danger to the public.
Mm-hmm.
So in Watson's case, the judge might have seen the international nature of the charges
Yeah.
and thought the risk of flight was just too high.
That makes sense. I guess then there's also this issue of Watson being denied an interpreter
Really?
during his initial hearing in Greenland.
Wow.
Yeah, the blog author is arguing that this is a straight-up violation of Article X of the Danish Administration of Justice Act.
Okay.
I know you're the expert on international law.
Oh, I try to keep up.
So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, Article X of that act
Yeah,
does guarantee the right to an interpreter for anyone who doesn't understand Danish,
okay.
but there are exceptions. Yeah,
Oh, what?
like in emergency situations.
Right.
Or if providing an interpreter would significantly delay the proceedings.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not really clear from the blog post which of these, if any, applied in Watson's case.
Yeah, they don't give us those specifics.
Right, yeah.
So moving on to August 15th, Watson appears in court again in Nuuk, Greenland, and he's denied release again.
Oh, no.
And the case is handed over to the Greenlandic police for further investigation.
Gee.
And the blog author is outraged,
Yeah, that's
calling it a blatant violation of human rights.
definitely concerning.
Right, and they're worried about the precedent this sets.
Yeah, if this can happen to a well-known activist like Watson, what does it mean for other activists around the world?
Exactly. It's a scary thought.
Yeah, it definitely raises some big questions about international cooperation on legal matters
Mm-hmm.
and, like you said, the protection of individual rights.
For sure. And things don't improve immediately.
Oh, no.
Watson's legal team, they file an appeal,
Okay.
but it takes months for any progress to be made.
Months.
Yeah, it's a long wait. And then on December 17th, 2024, there's like a sudden turn of events.
What happened?
Watson is released.
Oh, wow. So what happened?
The Danish Ministry of Justice stepped in.
Okay. And denied Japan's extradition request.
Wow. So they just let him go.
Yeah, they said that the charges weren't serious enough
Huh?
to justify extradition.
Interesting.
And of course, the blog author is relieved.
Yeah, of course.
But they're also left with a lot of unanswered questions.
Like what?
Like, why did the process take so long if the charges were ultimately deemed insufficient?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And why was the red notice allowed to disrupt Watson's life now when he's traveled freely to other countries in the past?
Right.
They even speculate that the timing of the arrest could be connected to recent Japanese whaling activities.
Oh, wow. That's a bold claim.
Right, so it's like there's this gray area in international law.
Yeah.
And the blog seems to be implying that Japan might have used this red notice situation to, like, pressure or silence Watson.
That's a serious accusation.
It is. So let's unpack this a bit more.
Okay.
What exactly is Japan's argument for this scientific whaling thing?
So Japan claims that the whaling is necessary.
To gather scientific data on whale populations.
Okay.
And they argue that this data is crucial for, like, managing whale stocks sustainably. But critics point out that the amount of meat that ends up on the market suggests commercial interests are at play.
Okay, so it's not really about science.
Well, that's what the critics are saying.
Right.
And they also point out that there are non-lethal methods for gathering the data.
Oh, so they don't have to kill the whales.
Exactly. So the killing seems unnecessary to a lot of people.
So there's a scientific debate, an ethical debate, and potentially even a political dimension with Captain Watson's arrest.
Right. It's like all these things are converging around this one person.
It's like a perfect storm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it really highlights these complexities of balancing conservation efforts with international relations and legal frameworks.
For sure. And it also forces us to think about the role of activism in influencing these delicate situations.
Totally.
And this deep dive is already getting pretty intense.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah. And we haven't even delved into the blog post arguments for Watson's defense.
Right.
I'm noticing some very specific language and tactics they're using.
Yeah.
What are your initial impressions?
Well, I think it's really important to look at the language they're using and how they're framing this whole situation. It's clear they're trying to evoke a really strong emotional response from their readers.
Oh, for sure.
They portray Watson as like this hero, you know, a lone warrior fighting for these voiceless creatures of the ocean.
Right.
It's a powerful narrative.
It is.
One that's likely to resonate with anyone who feels passionately about animal welfare and conservation.
It's like that classic David and Goliath story.
Exactly. They paint Japan as this massive, unfeeling machine, just churning through marine life.
Wow.
With no regard for international agreements or ethical considerations.
It's a really strong image.
Yeah, it's a classic tactic to rally support and create a sense of urgency.
And they even go a step further.
What do?
They provide a pre-written template for emailing the Danish embassy.
Oh, wow.
Like urging readers to take direct action.
That's really interesting.
Right.
It's a great example of how online platforms can be used to mobilize support and amplify a message.
Totally.
It turns outrage into concrete action by giving readers a way to channel their emotions into something tangible.
So you have this combination of strong emotional appeals and practical calls to action.
Yeah.
Seems like a very deliberate strategy.
Absolutely. And it's one that we see employed in a lot of online campaigns, particularly those focused on social justice or environmental issues.
Right.
By tapping into people's sense of empathy and giving them a concrete way to get involved, these campaigns can create a really powerful groundswell of support.
It's fascinating to see how these tactics play out in a real-world scenario with real-world consequences.
Totally.
Speaking of which, what are your thoughts on the effectiveness of these types of online campaigns?
Well, that's a complex question, and the answer depends on a number of factors, but
I was just going to say, we've seen like this huge rise in online activism in recent years.
yeah, for sure.
But translating that online outrage into like actual policy changes or legal victories,
Right.
that's a whole different ballgame.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
It's important to acknowledge that there's no like magic formula. Sometimes these campaigns can be incredibly effective.
Yeah.
Especially when they manage to like really capture the public's attention.
Right.
And put sustained pressure on decision makers.
Yeah.
We've seen this with movements like #MeToo and Black Lives Matter,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
which have undoubtedly sparked significant cultural shifts and policy changes.
And those movements really harness the power of social media,
Yeah, that's
which
it.
amplify their message and mobilize supporters.
Absolutely. But it's not always that straightforward.
Right.
Sometimes these campaigns fizzle out, or they might achieve some initial victories,
Yeah,
but they fail to bring about lasting change.
it's tough.
It is, and it often depends on the specific issue,
Yeah.
the level of public support, the strategies employed,
Right?
and frankly, a bit of luck.
It makes you wonder if there are any parallels to Captain Watson's situation.
Yeah.
Like, did the online campaigns demanding his release actually influence the Danish government's decision?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right. It's impossible to say for sure, but it's definitely an interesting thought.
It is, and I think even if we can't, definitively prove causation,
Yeah.
the fact that these campaigns exist,
Right.
that people are taking the time to write emails, sign petitions, and share their outrage online, that in itself sends a message.
What kind of message?
It shows that people are paying attention,
Okay.
that they care about this issue,
Yeah.
and that they're willing to hold those in power accountable.
So even if it's not a direct one-to-one relationship,
Right.
it's creating a climate of awareness and accountability.
Precisely, and that can be incredibly powerful in the long run.
Okay, so we've talked about red notices, scientific whaling,
Yeah.
and the role of online activism. Let's go back to the blog posts themselves.
Okay.
They do a lot more than just express outrage. They present this multi-layered defense of Captain Watson.
Interesting.
What stands out to you in their arguments?
Well, one thing that's really striking is how they intertwine the legal arguments with the ethical ones.
Oh, yeah, I noticed that too.
They don't just claim that Watson's actions were legally justified.
Right.
They also appeal to our sense of morality and compassion.
Yes. They spend a lot of time painting this vivid picture of the cruelty of whaling,
Yeah.
emphasizing the intelligence and majesty of these creatures.
Mhm.
It's almost like they're trying to make you feel the loss on a visceral level.
Exactly. They're not just presenting facts and figures.
Right.
They're trying to connect with readers on an emotional level.
Yeah.
And that's a really effective persuasive technique.
It is.
When you can get people to feel something,
Yeah.
to truly empathize with a cause, they're much more likely to be motivated to take action.
It's definitely a powerful approach. And they also tie the issue of whaling back to this broader issue of ocean conservation.
Right.
They argue that protecting whales is essential for the health of the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, they make a good point.
Right?
They point out that whales play a crucial role in maintaining the balance of marine ecosystems.
Okay.
They help regulate plankton populations, which are like the foundation of the marine food web.
Wow.
They also contribute to ocean fertilization, which is essential for the growth of phytoplankton, which in turn produce a significant portion of the world's oxygen.
So it's all connected.
Exactly. So by protecting whales,
Yeah.
we're not just saving a single species.
Right.
We're protecting the whole ocean ecosystem
Wow.
and ultimately ourselves.
It's a compelling argument.
It is.
So they're basically saying that what happens to the whales impacts all of us.
Exactly. And that's a message that resonates with a growing number of people.
Yeah, I think so too.
As we become more aware of the interconnectedness of our planet's ecosystems and the threats they face, there's this growing sense of urgency around protecting them.
And I think that sense of urgency is reflected in the blog posts.
Yeah.
They're not just presenting a dry academic argument.
Right.
They're pleading with readers to get involved.
Yeah.
To do something to help.
And that brings us back to the email template they provide.
Right.
It's a really clever way to channel that sense of urgency into concrete action
Yeah.
by making it so easy for people to contact the Danish embassy.
Mm-hmm.
They're lowering the barrier to entry for activism.
Totally.
You don't have to be like a seasoned campaigner
Right.
or write a long, eloquent letter.
Yeah.
You just click personalize and send.
It's almost like they're gamifying activism in a way.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
You see a problem, you feel outraged,
Yeah.
and then you have this clear, simple action you can take to address it.
It's very effective.
It is, and I think that's one of the reasons why online activism has become so popular in recent years.
I agree.
It provides a sense of agency, a way for individuals to feel like they're making a difference.
Right.
Even if it's just by clicking a button or sharing a post.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've seen how the blog posts combine legal arguments, ethical appeals, and calls to action
Yeah.
to create this compelling defense of Captain Watson.
Mm-hmm.
But there's another layer to this story that we haven't touched on yet.
What's that?
the media's role in shaping public perception.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
How do you think the media handled this case?
Well,
And what impact do you think their coverage had on the outcome?
that's a great question. I think it's safe to say that the media always plays a huge role in these high-profile cases.
Yeah.
They can either amplify a message or completely drown it out.
Right.
Did they help or hurt Watson's case, do you think?
That's what I'm wondering.
It's tough to say.
Yeah.
I think it was kind of a mixed bag.
Okay.
Some outlets, they focused heavily on the legal aspects.
Yeah.
You know, the red notice, the extradition process, almost presenting it like a legal thriller. Then others took a more sympathetic angle.
Okay.
Highlighting Watson's history of activism.
Yeah.
And portraying him as this, like, champion for the whales.
Oh, interesting.
So you had this range from, like, dry legal analysis to eco-warrior takes on the systems type narratives.
That's right. And then, of course, you had some outlets that were much more critical.
Oh, yeah.
Questioning Watson's methods, labeling him as a radical or even an eco-terrorist.
It's interesting because that brings up the whole debate about what constitutes acceptable activism.
Yeah.
Where do you draw the line between peaceful protest and illegal actions?
Yeah, especially when it comes to environmental issues.
Exactly. It's a question that has no easy answers.
No, it doesn't.
And it's something that we as a society need to grapple with more and more as the climate crisis intensifies.
Yeah.
And the stakes get higher.
For sure.
Some people argue that any action that breaks the law, even if it's done for like a greater good, is ultimately harmful because it undermines the rule of law. But others believe that more radical tactics are sometimes necessary to bring about urgent change.
Yeah.
Especially when traditional methods have failed.
So it's like this tension between following the rules and achieving moral outcomes?
Exactly. And I imagine the media coverage reflected this tension as well.
For sure. They probably played it up, even.
Yeah, probably. I think that's actually a healthy thing, though.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, it's important to have these different perspectives represented.
Right.
To, like, air out the complexities of the issue. If everyone just agreed with one side, we wouldn't have much of a debate, would we?
That's true. So with all this media attention swirling around the case, do you think it actually had any tangible impact?
Well, we could speculate about Japan's motivations for issuing the red notice.
Right.
But did the public outcry, the petitions, the social media campaigns, did any of that actually influence the Danish government's decision?
That's a good question.
It's impossible to say for sure.
Yeah.
But I think it would be naive to dismiss the power of public pressure.
Yeah.
Governments, they're not immune to public opinion, especially in democratic societies. When they see that a large number of people are passionate about an issue, it makes them pay attention.
Right.
And when they see that this passion is translating into concrete actions, like contacting elected officials, organizing protests, or even boycotting certain products, it makes them take notice.
So even if it's not like a direct cause and effect relationship, it creates a climate where certain decisions become politically untenable.
Exactly. And I think that's what we saw in Captain Watson's case.
Okay.
The media attention, the online campaigns, the public outcry, all of that contributed to a climate where it became very difficult for the Danish government to just ignore the situation and extradite him to Japan.
So in a way, even though it's impossible to prove definitively, it seems like the public played a role in securing Watson's release.
I think that's a fair assessment.
It's kind of empowering, actually.
It is. It's a reminder that we're not powerless in these situations.
Right.
We can make our voices heard and we can influence outcomes.
Yeah.
It's not always easy and it's not always guaranteed, but it's possible.
That's a great message to end on. We've covered so much in this deep dive.
We have.
International law, scientific whaling.
Yeah.
The role of activism, the power of public opinion.
It's been a whirlwind.
It really has. It's been a whirlwind tour of a very complex issue.
It really highlights the interconnectedness of things. You know, you have individual actions, international agreements, legal frameworks, media narratives, public pressure.
It's a lot.
It is all swirling together to shape the course of events.
And sometimes, against all odds, individuals like Captain Watson can make a real difference.
Yeah.
It's kind of inspiring, actually, even if you don't agree with all of his tactics.
Right.
He certainly made people think about whaling and ocean conservation in a new way.
Absolutely. And that's ultimately what effective activism is all about.
With
sparking conversations, challenging assumptions, and pushing for change.
Yeah.
Whether you agree with Watson or not, there's no denying that he's brought the plight of the whales to the forefront of public consciousness.
For sure. And for anyone who's interested in diving deeper into this topic, we'll be sure to include some links in the show notes.
Good idea.
There's a wealth of information out there about Captain Watson's Sea Shepherd, the International Whaling Commission, and the ongoing fight to protect our oceans.
It's a fascinating and constantly evolving issue, and one that deserves our attention.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.